Okay, now when we continue on in chapter 5, it's about time we talk a little bit about circumcision. We've seen this thing pop up again and again, and let's just kind of put it to rest once for all. What is the deal with circumcision? Well, Paul's saying this. Circumcision isn't really the bad guy here, even though he's talking a lot about it. In verse 6, he says, "For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love." Here's what he's saying. The Jew-Gentile debate is irrelevant. It's not about being a Gentile or being a Jew. It is absolutely irrelevant. That's what he means by the fact that it counts for nothing. Circumcision counts for nothing. Now, I'm sure that infuriated the Judaizers to hear that, but this really was what the gospel message was communicating, that it's irrelevant. Jesus Christ is everything. In fact, he goes on, he says it's about faith in Christ, working through love. Now we'll get into that a little bit more in the next video, but he goes on and he's saying here, someone is trying to confuse you. That these Judaizers are trying to confuse you. In verse 7, he says, you were running well, when they first came to Christ, who hindered you from obeying the truth. In other words, I've presented the truth, the true gospel, and someone else came in and hindered you, and they're trying to distract you and set you on a different course. He calls those people leaven, a little leaven. Leaven's never good in the New Testament. It's always impure. It always represents impurity, and he's calling the Judaizers leaven. He's calling them he says about the one who is troubling you, that they're going to bear the penalty. In fact, he goes on and he says, it's not me. I'm not the one that taught you this different perverted gospel. He wants to make sure they know they didn't hear this stuff from him. In fact, he says the message of the cross is offensive. That's what he says in verse 11. But if I am still preaching circumcision, which he's not, he says, then why would I still be persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. And this is another verse that maybe confuses you a little bit when you first read it. But what he's basically saying is, if I were going to try to bow to what my Jewish, the Judaizers were saying, if I was just trying to make friends here, then I'd say, yeah, it's no big deal. I'll preach circumcision along with you. Yeah, we'll compromise here. And he's basically saying, I'm not compromising here. There is no compromise here. There are other things Paul's willing to compromise on, but not the gospel. He says, circumcision doesn't save you. He says, I know it's offensive to hear that, but this is what the offense of the cross is. The offense of the cross is the idea that it's only through Jesus, it's 100% through Jesus, 0% through us that we can be saved. That's offensive to people, even 2,000 years ago, just as it is today. And so he says, as for the Judaizers, the ones who are teaching this is what he says about them in verse 12. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. So think about the sort of what he's saying here, what circumcision is. And he's saying, he basically is saying, I wish that the knife would slip on themselves and that they would go all the way. Now, those are pretty harsh words. Those are fighting words from Paul, but that's how strongly he felt about this. Why don't you hit pause for a second, talk about this before we go to the last video.